So welcome to the Motivic Geometry Seminar. So to make our lives even better, today we have Mathew Morrow, who will give his first lecture in this series on p-adic étale Motivic cohomology. Please, Mathew.
Thanks very much. Well, I hope at least I'm better than the virus, but we'll see about that. So many thanks to Paulana for the invitation to virtually be here today. So as he said, I'm going to be giving 3 talks today, tomorrow, and Friday, all at the same time, in which I will try to present something of an introduction to the recent developments that we've seen in p-adic Motivic cohomology. And you'll see that I've snuck in the word étale, because really that's all that we understand at present. One can hope to de-étale sheafify to say something about the Zariski theory, but I don't think I'm going to be touching at all on that. So the main references for these developments, this is a non-exhaustive list. It starts with this paper with Bhatt and Scholze on topological Hodge homology and integral p-adic Hodge theory. But then we'll be using also some results from this joint paper with Clausen and Mathew on algebraic K-theory and topological cyclic homology of Henselian pairs. That'll provide a useful technique, because ultimately all of our rings are going to be p-adic, and that lets us understand the difference when we go mod p. Then there's also some joint work with Antieau, Mathew, and Nikolaus on the valence and fiber sequence. And at some point I want to say something about étale K-theory. So the best reference there at the moment is this paper of Clausen and Mathew, where they really sort out some of the fine issues involved in hyperdescent around étale K-theory. And Bhatt, Clausen, Mathew's paper on K1 local K-theory. And finally, I'm going to try to adopt as much as possible a prismatic point of view on the constructions that I give, partly because it's really the cleanest approach, and partly because I suspect many of you have already seen some of the output of the first paper, and I want to explain how some of these results can be restated or reinterpreted a little bit from a prismatic point of view. So someone's asking if the notes are going to be available. Yes, Kirsten, I'll make so the notes will be available, and I think normally the video is being recorded. Is that right?
So yes, that's right. We'll put the video of the talk out on YouTube, and we will also make the notes available on the webpage of the seminar.
Okay, so there we go. And I welcome questions during the talk. It's probably easiest if you just turn on your mic and interrupt, because it's a bit complicated to follow the chat box at the same time as writing on the tablet. So there we go. So let's get going. Let me start by saying some words about what I mean by étale Motivic cohomology and the type of problems that we're going to be interested in. So let's recall some relations. So as I say, to introduce the main ideas. Let's recall some relations between, on the one hand, K-theory and variants of it, and étale cohomology. This is all going to be away from the characteristic, where we already essentially understand what's going on. And so the first theorem in this case, which I'll state slightly imprecisely and then fill in the details. So this will be due to essentially Suslin, Gaber, Thomason, and others, especially for some of the technicalities, states that if we've got some scheme X, and let's take some natural number which is invertible on X, you might as well imagine it to be a prime or a prime power, then mod L étale K-theory, which I'll say something more about in a moment, but just to set up the notation. This will be the mod L étale K-theory. This has a filtration which we understand pretty well. It's a filtration with jth graded piece just given by the étale cohomology of X. More precisely, the étale cohomology is all possible Tate twists of mu L. Appropriately shifted in an Antieau-Hertzberg style fashion, so that they correspond to a filtration on the K. This is all positive J, and my shifts are cohomological, so this is moving it cohomologically downwards, homologically upwards. Otherwise, in fact, there'd be nothing in homological range and couldn't possibly be telling me about K theory. So let me now spell out some of these details, in particular exactly what I mean by mod L étale K theory and what I mean by filtration in the current context. So let's begin with the étale K theory. So let's recall, since otherwise it wouldn't be necessary to introduce étale K theory, that K theory doesn't satisfy étale descent. And in fact, the failure of it to satisfy étale descent is the same as the failure of it to satisfy Galois descent. So in particular, as I say, really, really equivalently, what this means is that if I have some extension, so it's an étale, it's a finite étale extension with some Galois group, and I cannot compute the K theory downstairs by looking at the K theory upstairs and passing to the homotopy invariants for the action of the corresponding Galois group. That is not true. And the subject of that not being true is the Lichtenbaum-Cullen conjecture. So what one can do in a relatively naive fashion is we define étale K theory be the minimal, this will be kind of imprecise, let me give an imprecise statement to start with, be the minimal modification of K theory where this does hold. Or more precisely, so we just fix K theory so this works, or more precisely, we define, let's not worry about whether our schemes need to be quasi-compact or quasi-separated or any other such issues. I just define étale K theory from schemes to spectra to be the étale sheafification. So that's in the sense of infinity sheaves of, in fact, I'm going to take connective K theory. So I just view connective K theory as an étale pre-sheaf on schemes, and I just brutally étale sheafify without worrying at all about any Posnikov complete issues and so on. I'll make a comment about these in a second. And I work with connective K theory, and in fact, so throughout the talk we'll be describing, in fact, p-adic K groups of various rings which will appear, and except for some rare instances, we can generally not say very much about the negative K groups. In some sense, this is a talk about positive K groups. And that's part of the reason for the étale in the title, why we can't étale sheafify to say something about this risky theory, because then we would have to take account of the negative K groups, which at the moment we don't have such a good understanding of in this context. So let me make some more detailed remarks. So firstly, this sort of naively defined étale K theory appears, it was considered classically certainly by Soule, Friedlander, and others, or at least the Posnikov complete version was. And if you understand the subtlety about Poznikov completion issues, great. And if you don't, it doesn't matter. So I'm not going to say anything about it. Because in fact, there are better things that one can do. So indeed, an alternative to this construction of just étale sheafifying K-theory is Thomason's Bhatt inverted construction. So that is to say, I look at the K-theory, and it's not going to matter now if I take connective or non-connective K-theory with Z mod L coefficients, and I just invert the Bhatt class in K2. And again, I ignore any issues about existence of the Bhatt class, or whether L might equal 2, and I might not have a square or cube root of -1, all these types of issues that one does actually need to worry about in reality. Because even better than this would be to take the K1 localization of K-theory, where probably I'm now imagining that L is a prime, and there's an implicit L appearing in my K1 localization. This really implements inversion of the Bhatt element. But one can do even better than these sorts of alternative constructions, particularly if one is interested in developing some integral theory. So I'm going to be discussing what happens L-adically and p-adically, and not rationally, but of course at some point one wants to treat all primes and the rational data and glue everything together. And to do that, the best approach to étale K-theory is Clausen's Selmer K-theory, which precisely implements this sort of gluing. But just to summarize, for us, particularly in the p-adic part of everything that I have to say, which will be the focus of the course, this sort of naivest form of just étale sheafifying K-theory is going to do the trick. So we'll stick to that. So that's what I wanted to say about this étale K-theory. Let me continue these remarks on the statement of the first theorem. No, I guess this is really a definition. Let me, wow, yeah, it's not the definition. So what do I mean by filtration? So in the context of the first theorem, it's pretty, I mean something pretty weak. So by filtration, I think all our filtration will live on some spectrum. So on a spectrum K. So I don't mean more than a sequence of spectra and maps. So I've got K, I've got the first step of the filtration, I've got the zero step of the filtration, I've got the first step of the filtration, and so on and so forth. In fact, all my filtrations will look like that. And then associated to such a filtration, we have, as usual, the graded pieces. Actually, I guess I always even want fill 0 to be K, otherwise the statement for the graded piece is not really right. So then my graded pieces, GUR J of this filtration, these are of course just the co-fiber of fill J plus 1 to fill J of K. And generally the goal of this whole Motific homology business is to define filtrations and understand the graded pieces. So as it's defined, I mean, a filtration is in fact not very useful. It doesn't necessarily give us very much information about K. For that, at the very least, we need to impose a completeness condition, which is to say that I can recover K by taking the limit over all the quotients of the filtered steps. Where by this slightly sketchy piece of notation, excuse me, K mod fill S, I really mean I take the cofiber, of course. So I think that, so running back to the first theorem, so what did we say? We say that the mod L étale K theory has a filtration with graded pieces given by the étale cohomology. Should just then say also that, for example, on the subject of this completeness issue, the filtration in theorem 1 is complete under finiteness hypotheses on, well, on the dimension of X and the L cohomological dimension, or even more precisely, you just need the L virtual cohomological dimension of all residue fields of X. And I think for the best statement there, you go and look at the paper of Clausen and Mathew. In the p-adic context, this sort of bad phenomena will not appear. So let me now give you a sketch of this first theorem by constructing, well, so what we're going to do is we're going to compute some K groups étale locally. I'm going to remind you of the calculation of these K groups étale locally, because this will be the calculation that we later want to mimic p-adically. So if we, as I say, we're supposed to be putting some filtration on K theory, on this étale sheafification of K theory. So the first step is to understand how K theory behaves étale locally. So I take some strictly Henselian local ring, with residue field K. That's just the notation for the residue field. We can compute its mod L K groups in positive degree. So by a rigidity result of Gabor and Suslin, one knows that these K groups are the same as the K groups of the residue field. And then Suslin computed these for us. Rather, I mean, I guess it's Suslin plus Quillen. Suslin tells you that you can replace this separately closed field K by any other separately closed field of characteristic not equal to L. And then you just need one example where you can compute all the K groups, which is either algebraic closure of a finite field or the complex numbers. And what you get is that they vanish in odd degree. And in positive degree, you just get, in a sufficiently natural fashion, all the tape twists. So you get mu, let's write this just as a piece of temporary notation for Lth roots of unity in K. And then I'll tensor this by n over 2. That's for n positive and even. And again, to return to an issue that we had a moment ago about connective versus non-connective K theory, like, we can't, in general, compute these K groups on the left-hand side if n is negative. So it's anyway, we don't need to worry about that. So this is a calculation of individual K groups, but this can be this can be slightly, say this can be globalized to a calculation that the étale sheafification of, so I just look at this pre-sheaf given by one of the K groups on the étale side of X, and I sheafify that. And what this previous calculation really tells us is that I can compute these, and they're 0 if n is odd, and they're given by the Tate twists mu L tensor n over 2 if n is even. And the punchline then is that the étale Posnikov filtration works. If you're a reckless cheat in Thomason's sense, you just say, okay, I've got my étale sheaf of spectra. I mean, let's just pretend, in fact, it's a complex of sheaves satisfying étale descent, and then you have the classic hypercohomology spectral sequences that really correspond to a filtration on the hypercohomology, with terms given by the cohomologies of the sheafification of the individual cohomology sheaves. And that would be then exactly what you want, but you have to worry about all these nasty convergence issues if you want to get a complete filtration. But ignoring those, it's then just a formal consequence of this calculation of the structure of the K groups étale locally that you can produce such a filtration. And therefore, this is really what I would like you to remember. That the key to constructing such a filtration in the étale case, ignoring, as I say, any convergence issues, is just that we need to be able to compute. We need to be able to compute the K groups étale locally.
Sorry,
and that's all.
Sorry, can I interrupt you?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so your filtration is nothing but the Posnikov filtration in this.
Right.
Okay.
Étale local. In the strictly Henselian case,
yes,
it's just
étale local.
Right. That's right. I mean, I'm not saying anything deep. I'm not saying anything deep. I mean, that's precisely the point I want to emphasize. Like, the non-trivial aspect is the calculation of the K groups, and then there's nothing else to do. So let me continue to say something which then is somewhat deeper. Still away from the characteristic. Well, I think my theorems were in blue before, but you'll forgive the change of color. So this is now consequences of Motivic homology as developed by Vygotsky. So let me take some local ring of equicharacteristic local ring. So let me say local ring containing a field. And again, take probably some prime number, which is away from the characteristic. So I take some L, which is invertible in A. So one, we have a block-Kato isomorphism, which relates, so I said we want some general relations between K theory and étale cohomology. In this case, it's concerned with the Milnor K theory. So I look at the Milnor K theory mod L, excuse me. So as I say, this is Milnor K theory. Or rather, since I'm going to worry about having a finite residue field, I should really take the improved version of Gabor and Kurtz. And what does Bhatt say? It tells me that I can compute the Milnor K theory as the étale cohomology in the Milnor range. And the second result is a sort of, I mean, it's a consequence of Behlens and Lichtenbaum. It's not really fair to, I don't know what to call it. It's a sort of a combination of Behlens and Lichtenbaum and the existence of the Heer-Herzberg filtration on K theory given by Zariski Motivic cohomology. And it states that the mod L connective K theory, so I take the connective K theory and then I smash it mod L, has a filtration, I guess in this case it's automatically complete, with graded pieces now given by the Behlens and Lichtenbaum style truncations of what we saw in the étale case. Whoops. Again, got to appropriately a Heer-Herzberg style shift them. So up to truncating the étale cohomology, what Behlens and Lichtenbaum tells us is that it produces for us a filtration not on étale K theory, but just on the I don't want to say usual, but we need to be careful. It's the usual connective K theory. And let me immediately make some remark because someone is surely wondering about it. So these both reduce the case that A is essentially smooth over some field. They're normally not stated in the degree of generality, which I have, but they immediately reduce to that case because everything in sight is in fact invariant if you modify A by a Henselian ideal. That's an easy calculation on the K theory side. In étale cohomology, it's rigidity for étale cohomology, and for the connective K theory, that's Gaber's rigidity for connective K theory away from the characteristic. So I can always just pick some big filtered colimit of smooth algebras surjecting onto A, such that the kernel of this surjection is a Henselian ideal. I can modify everything inside and replace A by this in-smooth algebra. Then by some filtered colimit argument, I reduce to the essentially smooth case, and that's really what Vygotsky proved. But I wanted to write them down in this degree of generality because it's closer in spirit to what we'll see later.
Sorry, can I have another question?
Please, please.
In characteristic P, if L equals P, don't we have the same filtration of
right
theory with the mod P coefficients?
So you want that? Let me.
So you always assume that L is invertible.
Right.
Yeah, and suppose that L is not, L equals P.
Right.
I want to take K theory with mod P coefficients.
Right.
And I'm just wondering if I have the same filtration, Postnikov filtration with the same layers.
So which filtration is it that you're? So that's precisely the subject of this course.
Okay.
Is exactly what happens when L is equal to P. That's the focus of the course.
But the result,
none of the results that I've written down remain true if L is equal to P.
Yeah, and this is what okay, thank you.
But certainly for smooth varieties over a field of characteristic P, there does exist already a theory of p-adic étale Motivic homology, and I won't really be saying anything that isn't already known in that case, but the results are not just obtained by replacing L by P in the existing theorems. In particular, just looking at the étale cohomology of the mu p sheaf is not going to give you the right cohomological invariant in characteristic P.
Okay, thanks.
I also have a question.
Yeah, please.
So you don't even need A to be regular in your theorem?
No. As I say, you can do this sort of dirty,
okay.
in the smooth trick to.
Okay, perfect. I just
you can do this dirty trick to reduce the general case to the essentially smooth case.
Nice.
So I'm going to do this in blue. So.
Oh, Mathew, if you have time, I think there's another question in the.
Yeah. Go for it. I'm here for you.
In the chat, if you can take a look at that.
Oh, in the chat. Okay.
Does Milnor K theory with finite coefficients satisfy rigidity for Henselian pairs?
Yeah, away from the characteristic. I think this is fine. I mean, you just need to check. In fact, you just need to produce. So hi, I'm Alendo. So I answer your question. So of course, surjectivity is obvious, and you just need to produce a splitting. In fact, you just need to check that. What do you need to check? You need to check that if you have an element in the ideal, call it X, then you need 1 plus X. You need 1 plus, that's right, you just need 1 plus X to be an elf root. But that's clear because 1 plus X is going to be an elf root modulo the ideal. And this is an equation to which I can apply Hensel's lemma. So I continue. So the goal of these talks is exactly to follow up this question we had a moment ago. What about, so I've been discussing mod L K theory. What about mod P to the R when P is not invertible? So I now want to work at the characteristic. So in other words, if our goal is to understand mod P to the R K theory and variants of it, like étale K theory, what does it correspond to? And there are, of course, various classical answers to this question in special cases, but the goal is to present these recent developments which produce quite a general theory, so that results hold in the sort of generalities that we saw in theorems 1 and 2 away from the characteristic. So let me start with a few reductions. So firstly, just to simplify notation, it gets a bit tiresome always writing Z mod P to the R's everywhere. We now always let R go to infinity and work, whoops, and I'm going to work with various P completed invariants. So for example, we'll look at p-adic K theory, by which I mean the limit over R of the mod P to the R, of the mod P to the R theories. Or in other words, I take just the derived p-adic completion of the, I take the p-adic completion of the K theory spectrum. But as I say, it's really just a case to simplify notation, and you can always take the results that I've got and go mod P to the R if you prefer to work with finite coefficients for whatever reason. So now let's get into some reductions. So our goal is to understand these various K theory invariants. So we may assume that this scheme X that we're going to study is affine, because in general our invariants will all satisfy some Zariski descent, and so we just glue what we understand in the affine case, and then we replace A by its p-adic completion A hat. And so informally, we're allowed to do that because if I understand the K-theory of A and the K-theory of A1 over P and the K-theory of its p-adic completion 1 over P and excuse me, if I understand the K-theory of A1 over P, K-theory of A hat 1 over P, and the K-theory of A hat, then the pullback lets me recover the K-theory of A. And the idea is that I'm supposed to have a motific understanding or understand these things on the right, thanks to what we've seen in theorems 1 and 2. We understand these in terms of p-adic, étale, cohomology, because now P is invertible, so I can take L equals P in these. And so here there's definitely some subtlety because at a certain point we're going to be studying, in fact, étale K-theory, not K-theory, and then one would have to worry about whether the similar square for étale K-theory in place of K-theory was also homotopy Cartesian. But at least forgetting about some possible obstruction at K minus 2 and lower, you can replace K-theory by this Selmer K-theory and then appeal to a result of Clausen and Mathew that indeed the analogous square would be homotopy Cartesian. Let's see what's going on in the chat. Yeah, okay, so that's been answered. And so, thanks to these sort of heuristic reductions, our goal is going to be to understand K-theoretic invariants of p-adically complete rings. And the main theorem that I want to discuss states that there exists, in this generality, there exists a good theory of p-adic étale Motivic cohomology with many analogous properties to what we have seen above, away from the characteristic. So to any p-adically complete ring, more generally, I mean, this is really the natural degree of generality in which to work, in fact. You should take some derived p-complete simplicial ring. To this, we will naturally associate a theory of p-adic étale Motivic cohomology. It's a lot of adjectives. Which will be, let's keep it blue, this will be ZP J, weight J, p-adic étale Motivic cohomology of A over positive weights J. And these, just to give, so just so that we're all on the same page, these will be some p-complete. These are just some p-complete complexes. Okay, so there's some, as I said, there's just some p-complete complexes. We'll eventually see a bound on them that they, in fact, in weight J, they don't go beyond degree, cohomological degree J plus 1. Such that many of the properties that we saw for étale cohomology away from the characteristic have good analogs here. So the étale K theory, the p-adic étale K theory now, this will carry a complete filtration with jth graded, given by this gadget, as usual, appropriately Atiyah-Herzberg shifted. Then an analog of this Bloch-Carter isomorphism is going to appear shortly, I hope, in some paper with Morten Lüders, and states that for a local, but still p-complete, one can identify the p-adically completed K-theory of A with the Milnor range of this invariant. And thirdly, as an analog of this Beilinson-Lichtenbaum style filtration, one can say, this comes from a rigidity result in the Beilinson fiber paper, one can show that for A, again for A local, the p-adically completed connective K-theory carries a complete filtration with again graded pieces given by this Beilinson-Lichtenbaum style truncation of the étale theory. So those are the relatively close analogs of what we saw away from the characteristic. Firstly we have this, just to summarize, firstly we have this filtration on the, it's not very visible. We have this filtration on the étale K theory given by these cohomological invariants. We have this description of the Milnor K theory via sort of Bloch-Carter or Nestorenko-Suslin style isomorphism, and then we can describe the connective K theory as long as we introduce the appropriate truncations of our cohomological invariant. We also have some, let me continue to state some properties. So firstly, there's a couple of comparisons. In weight one can compute it. It's always good. And it's given as one usually expects for a theory of étale Motific cohomology. Namely, it's just the étale cohomology coefficients in GM, and then again I need to p-adically complete. Another comparison which provides the answer to a question that was asked earlier about what happens for smooth varieties in characteristic P. So if A is a regular FP algebra, so for example, some smooth algebra of a field of characteristic P, then what are these invariants? This is just going to recover for us. So I'll write it down in a second, but the punchline is that it's the usual or classical p-adic étale Motific cohomology, which was sort of conjectured to be the right thing by Milne. So it's not very readable. And then really shown to be the right thing by Geiser and Levine. And what is that? So I take the étale cohomology on spec A with coefficients. The notation is a little bit lax because I should really work modulo powers of P here. So I look inside the Durand-Witt complex at certain Frobenius fixed points, or in other words, I look at elements in these Hodge-Witt groups, W omega, which are generated by D-log forms. And it's known since the 70s that what should be p-adic étale Motific cohomology in characteristic P is the étale cohomology of these sheaves. That this provides the correct replacement for étale cohomology with coefficients in the usual Tate twists. And as I say, this was sort of introduced by Milne in an ad hoc way as being the correct definition of p-adic Motivic cohomology. And then once you have Vygotsky's theory available, Geis-Levine showed that Vygotsky's theory after p-adic completion really did just recover this. So this is the known and accepted usual p-adic Motivic cohomology when you're in this sort of situation of a smooth algebra or a smooth variety of a characteristic P field. And that is what this general invariant recovers. And similarly, for A, I want to say smooth, but one needs to be careful because I've assumed that everything is p-adically complete. So let me take A to be formally smooth over a mixed characteristic complete discrete valuation ring. Then we now know that this general theory reduces to, let me not write it down in detail, Sato-Schneider's say complex. So again, in this case, there exists, in fact, one could also say that in fact, in this case, it also reduces, like in the characteristic P case, it reduces to the p-adic completion of Bloch's cycle complex, which was extensively studied by Levine as a candidate for the Motivic cohomology in this context. But p-adically, you don't really need to go through this machinery of Bloch's complexified cycles. You can just explicitly write down a guess at what the p-adic Motivic cohomology should be. This is what Schneider and Sato have done. And again, one can check that the output of this general construction does collapse to that in this special case. So that is, I think, the end of the statements that I wanted to make encompassing this general theorem that there exists now a reasonable theory of p-adic Motivic cohomology with many analogous properties to what we saw for étale cohomology away from the characteristic and with the same sort of relations with the algebraic K-theory. And throughout the course of the talks, we'll see various additional properties, but these are the ones that I particularly wanted to highlight to draw the analogy to the p-adic story. So if there's no questions, I'll give the definition. I'll give them the definition of this gadget. Any questions? And the definition is not designed to be immediately understood. Rather, the goal of certainly the next talk and a half will be to unravel it and explain how it can be studied. So for A, and I want, okay, let me write it down and then. So for A quasi-symptomic, this is to be defined. It's a p-adically complete ring with certain mild conditions on its singularities. We'll define its p-adic Motivic cohomology as cohomology on A, on spec A, with coefficients in the sheafification of a K-theory sheaf. So more precisely, take the sheafification of this on the site, this quasi-symptomic site, which we'll be discussing in a moment. So let me, just to make sure, I really want to make sure we're all on the same page here. It's not a good moment to get lost. So I am going to study, we're going to study these K groups. And we're going to study these K groups p-adic coefficients now, quasi-symptomic locally, in the same way as in the proof of theorem 1, the key was to understand L-adic K groups étale locally. And once we have a sufficiently good understanding of them, we will just define this theory of p-adic étale motivic cohomology as a sort of generalized symptomic cohomology by taking the cohomology of this sheaf on a quasi-symptomic site to be defined. And this is not the definition that you originally find. You actually make some comment about this. So this is not the original definition. Which you find in BMS 2, but equivalent, thanks to the so-called odd vanishing theorem in the Prisms paper, which shows that there's no contributions that could be appearing from odd K groups. You have to be able to discard these possible contributions from odd K groups to focus on what's happening in the even K groups, and so this odd vanishing theorem does. But we'll come to that in the next talk.
Mathew, there's Mathew, sorry, can I interrupt? There's a question.
Yeah, please.
From Chuck in the chat. He asks if there are any problems if L equals 2.
In the old stuff, probably. In the new stuff, no. No, the new results in the case L equals even. Oh, wait, does L equal 2 or does P equal 2, Chuck?
L equals P equals 2.
L equals P equals 2. No, then in this theorem, there's no problem if P equals 2.
Thank you.
These sorts of problems indeed often appeared in classical attempts to define symptomic cohomology, but one of the advantages of this new approach is that it really gives the correct theory across all primes and gives it integrally, whereas classically one often only understood these invariants after inversion of P in the cohomologies. But now everything works nicely integrally, even if P is equal to 2. Though sometimes one needs to be a little bit more careful when P equals 2. Only a little bit more careful. And then I guess I should say for general P, so for general A, excuse me, so I've defined it for P complete A satisfying this condition on their singularities, this quasi-symptomic condition. And for general P complete rings A, we define this via left Kahn extension from P completions of finitely generated polynomial ZP algebras. So I look at I just make the point that those things are all in this category of quasi-symptomic rings. So the first definition defines it for quasi-symptomic rings. That includes or anything which is like P completely smooth, including P completions of finitely generated polynomial algebras. And I left Kahn extend from these to get a definition in general. And one of course needs to check, for example, that the two definitions are compatible if you have some ring if you try to evaluate the value of the cohomology in two fashions, either by using the first definition or by using the left Kahn extension definition, you need to check these are compatible. But this is maybe less important, and I don't think I'll have much time anyway to discuss this extension to general rings. We'll just focus on to a large extent on the quasi-symptomic case. So maybe, I mean, I've got 5 minutes left. Why don't I jump? Why don't I just continue and start the next section? And make a little bit of headway of it, and then you'll know what's to come in the next talk. So I've got to spend some time discussing this quasi-symptomic business. So more precisely, we really want to understand this definition. That's the next step. In other words, what does this mean? Concretely, we need to understand K groups quasi-symptomic locally, and there I want to remind you yet again that the key to theorem 1, away from the characteristic, was really understanding K, even it was understanding K groups, came down to understanding K groups étale locally, away from the characteristic. And in particular, we had an explicit description that once you sheafify, once you étale sheafify K groups away from the characteristic, you just get the usual take twists. And this is the sort of result that we're going to be aiming towards, but at the characteristic. And we won't be working étale locally, we will be working quasi-symptomic locally. So I guess we can start next time with the improved definition. I'll finish this time with the classical definition. So one says that a map of, I think I really only define this in the Noetherian case, is said to be symptomic if, so you ask that you ask it to be flat and it is a local complete intersection. So that is to say, locally it can be written as some smooth map modulo a regular sequence. And one has a result of Quillen that you can detect such a symptomic property purely in terms of behavior of the cotangent complex, as long as you impose some suitable finiteness conditions. So Quillen showed that a flat finite type map A to B between, again, you need to assume everything's Noetherian, between Noetherian rings is, well, it's symptomic. In other words, I just need to check that it's LCI, and then I'll satisfy all the conditions. If and only if the cotangent complex has Tor amplitude all my indexing is cohomological, so I asked that I've got Tor amplitude sitting in the range -1, 0, which you indeed see as a necessary condition, but in fact it's sufficient. And so we'll start next time by explaining how this can be generalized to P complete, not necessarily, Noetherian rings. And
and this is where your prefix quasi occurs.
Right. In fact, there should really be two prefixes. there should be a quasi to indicate that you define the condition in terms of the cotangent complex, and there should be a p completely to indicate that one is really going to work with the p completed cotangent complex. But constantly saying p completely quasi-symptomic gets a little bit heavy, so one tends to drop the p completely. But indeed, that's exactly the idea. We're just going to detect, we're going to introduce some type of suitable symptomic condition for p completed rings just by examining behavior of the cotangent complex. And the reason that's useful is it lets you discard, as I say, it lets you discard any sort of Noetherian or finite type conditions, which has the advantage. So the purpose of this symptomic cohomology in characteristic P is that it lets you add P fruits of unity. So these are the prototypical non-étale maps in characteristic P, but which are symptomic. And what you'd very often like to do is add all P fruits of all elements. And this you can't do symptomically, but you will be allowed to do it quasi-symptomically. Will be a convenient technical method to reduce, for example, to suitably perfectoid situations where we'll be able to calculate everything. But this I will turn to next time. I'd better finish there. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mathew. So we can all unmute and give the speaker a round of applause.
Well, thank you very much for this international round of applause. It's good to think of people clapping everywhere in the world.
Well, okay, maybe we have some questions for Mathew.
There's nothing in the chat.
When I think of block Kato, I think of mod L Milnor K theory, and in your statement, if I got it correctly, it was Milnor K theory of A mod L. Am I supposed to know that those are very similar?
No, that's more likely to indicate that I made a typo. That would be theorem 2 somewhere. It's more likely to indicate a typo. No.
Oh,
My L is outside. My L is outside.
Okay.
I've definitely made that typo, so it was perfectly believable. But here I'm okay. So
related to Chuck's question about 2, at 2 we have this connection between Milnor K theory mod 2 and quadratic forms, and about in characteristic 2, any connections between bilinear forms?
I have no idea.
Fair enough.
I think you'd be much more qualified to answer that question than I would be. No, I don't know. That's a good question, actually. Can one say? I mean, yeah, I have no answer, in fact, but it indeed looks like something worth looking at.
Thanks.
I have a question. You said you referred to Clausen and Mathew. I guess they must have redone what Thomason did back in the 80s. Can you say a little bit about what's the difference between what Thomason did and what Clausen and Mathew did besides updating terminology?
They clear up what it means. So they clear up some of these descent issues. Now, I'm not an expert on this issue, so. I mean, this distinction between hypercomplete sheaves and Posnikov complete sheaves didn't even exist. I don't think it could be reasonably formulated at Thomason's time. So Thomason proved the existence indeed of a convergent spectral sequence, which should amount to verifying that his Bhatt inverted K theory is Posnikov complete.
Right.
But they prove much more general results giving conditions on when étale pre-sheaves of spectra will be hypercomplete. Whereas if I'm not mistaken, Thomason actually hyper-completes it. So I think this issue is not going to appear in what he did.
Okay, thanks.
But I could be wrong there. I could be wrong there. As I say, these issues disappear p-adically. So I've had the good fortune to not need to worry about them too much.
I also have a question. I don't think I quite understood your remark about, so you said something about how the negative K groups are somehow more closely related to Zariski Motivic cohomology or something like that. Could you explain that?
Right. Well, let's just say in this étale K theory, I mean, if you choose to work with this construction of Thomason of inverting the Bhatt element, it kills the negative K groups. You know? Now, typically one has tried to develop Motivic cohomology in a context in which the schemes are regular, probably even smooth over a field, and then there aren't any negative K groups to worry about. One can dream, though, of some more general Motivic invariants related to algebraic K theory, which might also say something about the negative K groups. But as I say, these issues are similar. They disappear in the étale theory.
Thanks.
So are you taking the positive K theory and then using some sort of descent, which is what we now know in the Zariski setting would reconstruct negative K theory?
Sorry, I don't think I follow the question.
Normally, one trick you can do is you can take positive K theory and then sort of impose Zariski descent, and then you get negative K theory. I mean, you get all of K theory. So does something similar like that could possibly work?
No, that doesn't. That's not true though. If I just force the Zariski descent onto connective K theory, I won't get algebraic K theory.
I think you do.
Well, no, because for a local ring, for example, it would still be connective. But as you know, a local ring can still have negative K groups. You instead have to perform this more subtle de-looping process. Sorry, this Bhatt construction.
I'm thinking more of the Meyer-Vietoris trick that if the positive thing has to leak over in negative homotopy groups.
Right, but this is what's implemented, I would say, rather by this by the Bhatt construction. I mean, I understand what you're saying, that your Meyer-Vietoris sequence can fail for connective K theory because of just some K0 or K-1 issue, and then this problem propagates. But this doesn't imply that algebraic K theory is given by Zariski sheafifying connective K theory, because as I say, that process wouldn't change its value on local rings, but the algebraic K theory of a local ring can still spread out into negative degree.
All right, I'll have to think about it.
Okay.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
At some point, you mentioned that there were some alternatives of étale sheafification of K theory, and I presume that in order for alternatives to exist, then their goal of existence is more than to just study what happens when you étale sheafify. So my question is, what was the underlying goal of defining all these alternatives? And also, unless it's too complicated of a question, what makes one better than the other?
Okay, so maybe this can be answered very easily by just telling you why the last one is the best.
Sure.
So in this paper of Clausen and Mathew, they study the Selma K theory, which is defined by gluing topological cyclic homology and L1 localization of K theory and topological cyclic homology. And they prove that this agrees with the sort of the most naive option, this first thing, just by étale sheafifying K-theory, they show that it agrees with this in degrees -1 and above. But then they also show that it has all the nice properties that you would ever want from a K-theoretic invariant. In particular, it depends only on the associated infinity category of perfect complexes on X. So in fact, this sum of K-theory is defined as an invariant on any stable infinity category, which gives you then this enormous flexibility that you normally enjoy with algebraic K-theory. Whereas these other sort of more hands-on approaches of just étale sheafifying K-theory or just inverting the Bhatt element, they don't enjoy that flexibility.
So what you're also implying then is that étale K-theory is some derived invariant.
Yes, that's what follows. That's what follows.
Okay. Huh.
Which is not at all obvious. Not at all.
No.
Obvious.
Okay.
No,
okay. Yeah.
No. Absolutely not. No. Yeah, that's
all right.
No. You need that result for this.
Yes. Thanks a lot.
There's one question.
Yeah, sure. I just saw that. Not sure I follow the question, Amalendo. So can we relate the p-adic étale cohomology of singular rings I defined in terms of logarithmic derived sheaves via some descent? Via some descent. I'm not sure what you mean by descent in this context. I mean, I'm not sure I follow the question well enough to answer.
Amalendo, maybe Amalendo has a chance to unmute, or can you do that maybe?
No, I was asking if you can sort of describe the p-adic étale Motivic cohomology non-regular rings in terms of homology of logarithmic derived shapes.
Yes, but you have to remove the word descent. Okay. So in fact, it will be defined by a left Kahn extension process. So if you look at usual p-adic étale Motivic cohomology on smooth things, so that is to say, you just take the cohomology of the logarithmic derived sheaves. So we look at that on, let's say, on smooth FP algebras. And then I can extend that to arbitrary algebras by left Kahn extension. And that will in fact produce this general theory of p-adic étale Motivic cohomology. And then indeed you can try to calculate it in some cases with some interesting singularities, which seems tricky, but by no means impossible.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Don't think so. I think we should wrap it up for today. And the next talk in this series is tomorrow, same time, same place. So see you all then.
Okay, bye for now. See you then.